The old man, Elias Thorne, moved with the gentle cadence of seasons long past. His hands, gnarled by time and toil, still sought to mend, to soothe. One crisp autumn morning, in Oakhaven's only general store, a place smelling of fresh-ground coffee and oiled wood, he saw a young woman, her face a mask of weary frustration. A baby wailed in her arms, a small basket of necessities lay on the counter, and her purse yielded only a scattering of insufficient coins. The line behind her grew, a silent pressure. Elias, who had come for a spool of thread to patch his work coat, stepped forward almost imperceptibly. He laid a worn $10 bill on the counter. "For the young lady," he murmured, his voice soft as dry leaves skittering across a porch. He offered no more, just a slight nod to the astonished mother, a flicker of a smile that barely touched his faded blue eyes, and then he retrieved his thread, paid, and was gone before her stammered thanks could fully form. He sought no acknowledgment. The act itself was its own quiet purpose. Elias lived in a small clapboard house at the edge of Oakhaven, where the fields began to roll towards the distant hazy hills. Martha, his wife, had been gone 10 years, and the silence in the house was a constant companion, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and the hum of his own routines. He tended his small vegetable garden, coaxing life from the soil with the same patient care he had once afforded wounded men in a forgotten war. He was a humble man, his days measured by simple tasks, his heroism folded away with his old uniform in a cedar chest, unseen, unspoken. He did not consider the ripple effect of his small kindnesses, for they were as natural to him as breathing. He was often unaware of the subtle currents his presence stirred in the quiet waters of the town, accustomed more to being a shadow than a light. A few weeks later, the chill of late autumn had sharpened the air. Elias returned to Henderson's general store. Mr. Arthur Henderson, the owner, was a man newer to Oakhaven, a man whose ledger was his compass and whose heart beat in time with profit margins. He had a clipped, efficient way about him that brooked no idle lingering. Elias, having found the winter rye seeds he needed, paused by the old pot-bellied stove, a relic from the store's previous, warmer incarnation. He was simply catching his breath, the cold air having found its way into his old lungs. He saw young Timmy, the new cashier, looking overwhelmed, and Elias offered a kind word, a brief reminiscence of how his Martha used to say a smile was the best currency. Mr. Henderson emerged from his office at the back, his gaze sharp and appraising. He saw not a valued customer, nor a gentle elder, but an unprofitable fixture. His voice, when it came, was devoid of warmth, smooth and cold as a river stone. "Mr. Thorne," he said, the name uttered with a distinct lack of familiarity. "This is a place of business. If you are not making a significant purchase, I must ask you to move along." Elias, startled, felt a flush creep up his neck. I was just buying these seeds, Mr. Henderson, and warming myself a moment." "This isn't a shelter," Henderson stated flatly, his eyes flicking over Elias's patched coat. "Frankly, your presence can be unsettling for some of my clientele. Perhaps it would be best if you took your custom elsewhere in the future." The finality in his tone was like a door slamming shut. The word unsettling struck Elias with a force that stole his breath. He, who had cradled the dying and calmed the terrified, unsettling, the seeds suddenly felt heavy in his hand. He placed them on the counter, the small bag, a testament to an unfulfilled need. Without a word, for words had deserted him, he turned and walked out of the store, the bell above the door jangling mockingly behind him. The warmth he had sought from the stove was extinguished by a deeper, more pervasive chill. He walked home, the familiar path blurred by a sudden, unexpected sting of tears, his dignity bruised, the memory of countless faces he had comforted, lives he had touched, rising like ghosts to mock Henderson's careless cruelty. News of Elias Thorne's effective banishment from the general store. Oakhaven's small heart, spread in hushed tones, like mist seeping through the town. Some shrugged, Henderson's efficiency having its admirers. Others felt a pang of discomfort, a sense of something cherished being tarnished. But life, for most, moved on. Elias retreated further into the quietude of his home, the wound of that dismissal a dull ache in his chest. Then, about a month later, as winter began to lay its first frosty fingers on Oakhaven, a different kind of murmur rippled through the town. A motorcade of dark, unassuming cars had arrived, and from one stepped a man who carried an air of quiet authority that was palpable. He was tall, his posture erect, his eyes holding a depth of experience that commanded respect without demanding it. This was General Alistair Finch, a name whispered with a certain awe, for he held the rare, almost legendary rank of six-star general, an honorific, bestowed for service of extraordinary and singular merit, a rank not actively held by any living officer for decades. He was said to be scouting locations for a quiet retirement, a place far from the corridors of power. General Finch was a man who listened more than he spoke. He heard the whispers about the old man and the store owner. He saw Elias Thorne one afternoon, tending the last of his frost-kissed roses, a figure of stoic solitude. There was something in the old man's bearing, a familiar resilience in the set of his shoulders, that resonated with the general, reminding him of stories his own father, a decorated colonel, used to tell. Intrigued, General Finch visited Henderson's general store. Mr. Henderson, learning of the general's identity, was a study in sycophancy, his usual brusqueness replaced by an oily deference. The general, however, was a keen observer of men. He noted the sterile precision of the store, the absence of the easy camaraderie he associated with such small-town establishments. Casually, he inquired about the community, about its older residents. When he subtly guided the conversation towards Elias Thorne, Henderson waved a dismissive hand. Oh, him. Just an old fellow. A bit of a vagrant, really. Not good for business, if you understand. A flicker of something cold and hard entered General Finch's eyes. A vagrant? He repeated, his voice dangerously soft. The general, a man for whom honor and service were sacrosanct, felt a surge of indignation. That evening, he made a few discreet inquiries. The name Elias Thorne, coupled with a vague recollection of his father's wartime stories, spurred him to delve deeper. Within days, through old military records and contacts, the truth unfurled. Elias Thorne was no vagrant. He was a former Army medic, recipient of the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action during the Korean War. He had repeatedly braved intense enemy fire to render aid to the wounded, saving, by official count, more than a dozen lives. And among those names one leapt out at General Finch with the force of a physical blow. Lieutenant Alaric Finch, his own father. His father had often spoken, with profound gratitude, of an unnamed medic, a quiet, fearless young man who had stayed by his side through a night of unimaginable horror, staunching a life-threatening wound, his calm presence a beacon in the terrifying darkness. That medic, son, his father had said, his voice thick with emotion. He was the best of us, the very soul of courage and compassion. The general acted with swift, decisive purpose. He made Mr. Henderson an offer for the general store, an offer so significantly above its market value that Henderson, blinded by avarice, accepted without hesitation, eager to depart Oakhaven for what he imagined would be greener pastures. The news of the sale and the identity of the buyer sent shockwaves through Oakhaven. A six-star general buying their little store? It was beyond comprehension. Speculation ran rife. When the transfer of ownership was complete, General Finch did not make a grand announcement. Instead, he quietly rehired Mrs. Gable, a kind, elderly woman whom Henderson had dismissed for being too slow. He had a small, simple bronze plaque affixed near the entrance. It read, "This establishment is dedicated to honoring service, kindness, and the enduring spirit of community." Slowly, the pieces began to connect in the collective mind of Oakhaven. The young mother Elias had helped spoke of his quiet generosity, her voice trembling with remembered gratitude. Others recalled similar, small, unheralded acts. Elias helping to fix a widow's leaking roof, sharing his garden's bounty, offering a comforting word when it was most needed. A sense of collective shame settled upon some for their silence, for allowing such a man to be so casually dismissed. The store, under its new, quiet stewardship, began to feel different, warmer. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with something less tangible, a renewed sense of respect. General Finch did not summon Elias to the store. He went to Elias's small house, finding him in the late afternoon sun, kneeling beside Martha's cherished rose bushes, his hands gently turning the soil. The general was not in uniform, but in simple civilian clothes that nonetheless carried an unmistakable dignity. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice imbued with a quiet warmth. Elias looked up, shielding his eyes against the low sun. He saw a man whose face was etched with thought and authority, yet whose eyes were kind. "My name is Alistair Finch." The general paused, letting the name settle. "I believe you knew my father, Colonel Alaric Finch. Or rather, he knew of your courage, though perhaps not your name. You saved his life in Korea during the Battle for Hill 209. Elias rose slowly, his joints stiff, his mind reeling back through the decades, through the smoke and chaos of a distant battlefield. He remembered the young lieutenant, pale and bleeding, the fear in his eyes, the whispered words of thanks. A wave of emotion, profound and unexpected, washed over him. He could only nod, his throat tight, the past suddenly, vividly present. He never forgot the medic who refused to leave his side. General Finch continued, his voice gentle. He told me many times. That man, whoever he was, embodied the very best of what it means to serve, to care for a fellow soldier. Finding you, it's been a wish of mine for many years. The general reached into his pocket and produced a small, heavy object. It was a challenge coin, intricately engraved, bearing a unique insignia. My father would have wanted you to have this. It's my personal coin, but today it represents his gratitude and mine. A small token, Mr. Thorne, for an immeasurable act of valor and compassion. Elias's hand trembled as he accepted the coin, its cool metal a tangible link to a past he had thought buried. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the image of the general. I only did what needed doing, sir," he whispered, the words heartfelt, sincere. "We all did. And you did it with extraordinary courage, Elias," the general said, using his first name with a respect that warmed the old medic's soul. "This town, this store, it's a small thing, but I wanted it to be a place that reflects the values you lived by, the values you defended." A few days later, Elias Thorne found himself walking towards the newly reopened Oakhaven General Store. A certain hesitation still clung to him, the shadow of Mr. Henderson's cold dismissal not entirely faded. But as he approached, General Finch, who was sweeping the front porch himself, looked up and smiled, a genuine welcoming smile. "Elias," he said, his voice easy and friendly. "Good to see you. The coffee's fresh, and Sarah Parker, the young mother you helped a while back, she left a little something for you at the counter." Inside, the store felt alive. Mrs. Gable was back behind the counter, her cheerful chatter a welcome sound. Sarah Parker was there, her baby now gurgling happily in her arms. She turned, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you, again, for everything." She pressed a small jar of homemade apple butter into his hands. Other townsfolk, those who had once been indifferent or merely curious, now greeted Elias with a new warmth in their eyes, a quiet respect in their nods. There were no grand speeches, no public adulation, only a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a collective acknowledgment of a good man too long overlooked. He was not paraded as a hero, but he was seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in many years. The general poured Elias a cup of coffee himself. "On the house, Elias?" he said with a smile. "For valued members of the community." That evening, Elias sat on the bench outside the renewed general store, the stoneware mug warming his hands, the bronze plaque gleaming softly in the twilight. He watched the Oakhaven sky bleed into hues of lavender and rose, the challenge coin a comforting weight in his pocket. He felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet joy that settled deep in his bones. The loneliness that had been his steadfast companion for so long had eased, replaced by a gentle sense of belonging. The following spring, as the earth softened and life stirred anew, Elias Thorne planted a new rose bush in his garden, alongside Martha's beloved blooms. It was a vibrant, crimson variety, a symbol of life renewed, of hope rekindled. Under the vast, open sky, his heart felt a quiet echo of the kindness he had once offered, now returned to him, not tenfold, but in a measure that filled the quiet spaces of his soul. The land, like his spirit, was healing,